Welcome Backstage. I'm Theresa MacNeil. How do you think television has affected your life, your relationships with the opposite sex, with political authorities? Do you think it's changed the adult-child roles in this country? Well, my guest, Dr. Joshua Meyrowitz, has some very provocative ideas on the subject. He is Associate Professor of Communication at the University of New Hampshire and author of the recently published book, No Sense of Place, The Impact of Electronic Media on Social Behavior. Welcome to Backstage Closeup.
It's nice to be here.
Dr. Meyrowitz, the title of your book is so intriguing, No Sense of Place. What's that really all about?
Well, it means that television has broken the age-old bond between where we are physically and what we see and experience. Our children, for example, may still be sheltered at home, and yet television takes them across the globe before we as parents give them permission to cross the street. Television has exposed even homebound women to all those parts of the culture that we once told women they weren't supposed to know anything about, they weren't supposed to see. And also, while average citizens rarely travel to see their leaders in the flesh, television now shows us all of our leaders in close-up, stumbling and stammering in living color.
So it sort of changes who knows what about whom then.
Exactly. It's restructured the whole social landscape, that where we are now, our physical place, no longer shapes our social place, that is, our sense of our position in the society.
Well, do you think that people get confused about where the real place is?
I think that we often do, in that we react to those things that we see on television more powerfully than we react to things that are happening around us in our neighborhoods and in our communities.
I think that's often true. I mean, we know more about what's going on in Lebanon than we do 4 doors down the street. I mean, someone's house burns down the street, we may not even know about it.
Exactly.
And yet, if it happens in, you know, a riot in Philadelphia or something, we're very up on it. How does that affect our relationships with our neighbors, as a matter of fact?
I think that we have to think that we have a limited amount of time and emotional energy in our lives, and the more that we get involved with those people and those things that we see on television, even very good things, such as involved in famine in Ethiopia, or the more we're concerned with the lives of the performers or newscasters we see on television, the less we must be involved with our neighbors and our friends and even the people we live with in our own homes.
So you're going to lay a guilt trip on me?
No.
No, but it is something really to think about. How much time do I really spend with my neighbors and my concerns about them as individuals?
I think that we have now a broader, but also a shallower sense of ties and affiliation with people. And we no longer go down to the local hardware store to find out what's going on in the world. Now we go and look at our television sets and to keep in touch with what's happening, whether it's a shuttle explosion or a war or a famine disaster or something else. We no longer sense that things are happening simply in our communities, but they're happening in a broader arena, and that means that in that sense we're less involved with those people and things that are happening where we are and the places that we're in.
Now, when I think of the other books that I've read about TV and social behavior, I think of, you know, specific programming content, you know, books about sex, about violence, and all of these effects that they have on us as individuals. How is your approach different?
Well, I don't really deal with the effects of the content per se, and I'm not concerned with imitation or persuasion, which is what most people look at on television. I think that that's not the major impact of television. I think that that view that looks simply at the content looks at television as if it's just like any other technology or any other medium of communication, and just looks at what's on it. I think what television, the real impact of television, is that it's rearranged what we know and experience. And I think that as a result of this, it's not simply that our children imitate what they see on television, but that we've changed the whole meaning of childhood.
Well, let's get into that, this blurring of the adult-child roles in our society.
Okay, well, we used to think of childhood as a time of innocence and isolation. That is, we used to define childhood in terms of separating children from the adult world.
Protecting them from the things we didn't want them to know.
Right, and we used to conspire as adults as to what to protect them from. We used to write books to each other, say, well, we shouldn't allow children to read these books or hear about these topics. And we have a whole set of secrets.
Spelling words instead of saying the words.
S-E-X, and spelling them out.
Yes,
We use, and literacy, that's a good example of that. Literacy was one of the major means through which adults were able to do this. That is, children don't know how to read. Young children can't read. And even when you know how to read, you learn to read in stages based on the complexity of the book. So adults could shield young children from many adult secrets, such as sex, birth, death, abortion, drugs, suicide. They could even shield children from the fact that adults do not always know what to do with children.
Don't know all the answers.
They don't know all the answers. And they could also then give children of different ages different sets of information. Young children would learn certain ideals and myths. George Washington never told a lie. He cut down the cherry tree. And then in each age level, each year, children would learn more about what I call the backstage area of adulthood. That is, they would find out more about the secrets, about the ways adults behave when they're not in front of children.
Well, how has this affected the power structure in the home?
Oh, it changed it tremendously, where children now know about all those things through television. Television gives out its information in no particular order or sequence. It exposes children to all those parts of the culture we spent several centuries keeping hidden from them. And what that means is that our children now are speaking and dressing and acting more adult-like. At the same time, adults have been exposed in many ways. You can't pretend anymore for your children that you always know best, that you always know what to do, because the children have seen adults murder each other on TV, kill each other through drunk driving. They know that adults cry and have difficulty dealing with everyday life at times. And so it doesn't make any sense for us anymore to try to shield our children from everything or to try to pretend for them that we always know best. And so we find ourselves taking our children to funerals now and asking our children's advice. And it's rearranged the power structure dramatically in the home.
Well, you know, I'm just thinking in some ways, you know, even something as simple as the way we dress. It used to be adults dressed in an adult-like fashion, and children were out there with the Superman T-shirts. But now it seems it's the adults wearing the Superman T-shirts, and it's the children wearing the designer clothes.
Well, you have this complete mix now. You have designer clothes being made for young children, and you have adults wearing Mickey Mouse T-shirts, jeans, and sneakers. And then you also have this clothing that's designed for all ages, designer jeans, which is a strange phrase if you think about it. It's a kind of combination of the play clothes denim of children and the high fashion clothing of adults.
Well, how do you think television specifically has made adults more childlike to bring them to this point?
Well, I think that if you think about it, adults have always behaved in childlike ways.
I mean, meaning that we're all really children inside, and we're just sort of like looking for opportunities for that to come out?
Well, adulthood is not something that simply develops when you get older.
Just because you grow a beard doesn't...
Just because you grow a beard doesn't mean you're suddenly an adult. Part of what adulthood is that in the past, it was that adults had a backstage area where they could get away from children, where they could hide and shield from people their illnesses and their fears and their anxieties, and then they could present this very formal on-stage role for children that, you know, we always know what's going on, we're cool, we're calm, we're collected. And what's happened now is that a lot of this backstage area has been exposed through television, and adults now are more willing to admit their fears, their anxieties, and their childish behaviors, which we always had, but we didn't show them publicly. And now we find that we're behaving in kind of this strange mixture. So you may remember this very incongruous image of Dr. Jarvik, the inventor of the artificial heart, sitting cross-legged on the ground with reporters discussing his invention as if he was a young child playing a game. At the same time, around that same period of time, Samantha Smith was acting as a diplomat. I think she was 11 years old or something at the time, and was also interviewing presidential candidates and had her own talk show for a while. So this strange merging of the ways that people behave, and I think that it's very much like the way that adults and children used to behave in the Middle Ages. when adults would eat with their hands and would play children's games. You see some of these old Bruegel paintings where the adults are playing hopscotch with the children, and where children were dressed like little adults. They wore the same types of clothing. They went to war with adults. They drank in taverns with adults. They gambled with adults.
I don't really think that I was aware of that. Let me ask you, when you were talking about knowing and knowing best, that brings to mind the TV show Father Knows Best, Leave It to Beaver. And then more recently, One Day at a Time. One Day at a Time.
Yeah.
Now, let's take it to specific programming. How do you think that those particular television shows have affected us as far as this adult-child relationship?
Well, this is a great example of why I think we shouldn't just look at imitation. And the children on Father Knows Best, for example, are very innocent. But when I, as a child, watched Father Knows Best, I did not learn from that show to behave in an innocent way. I didn't simply imitate the people who were labeled like me, kids. You're a kid,
okay.
you act innocent. Instead, I watched Father Knows Best, and I found out that parents behave one way when they're alone and another way when they're in front of children. I saw the parents act cool, calm, and collected when they were in front of their kids. They knew best, or they pretended to know best. But when they were alone, they expressed doubts and fears and anxieties. Jim wonders how good a father he is, and that sometimes they have arguments and these things, and they hide these from the children. So that I think that this was a very damaging view of adulthood for children. It revealed the backstage area of adulthood, how adults behave when children are not there. It revealed that adults play roles for children.
Well, do you think when we talk about like the flower children and all of the upset of the 60s, do you think that that was a direct result of finding out what was going on behind the scenes as far as how adults and parents thought?
Well, you may remember that one of the major themes of the 60s was the credibility gap.
Yes.
If you think about it, credibility gap means that people suddenly perceive some gap between the way people behave and speak publicly and what they really think and do privately. And I think that was a result of this exposure of the backstage areas of life, where the new generation suddenly said, well, wait a second. The way that people are speaking to us in public and what they're saying and how sure they are of what they're doing in civil rights and in the war in Vietnam and all these areas, that doesn't jive with what we're seeing behind the scenes, where we're seeing that adults do not always know that what they're saying to children is accurate, and where people seem to be playing roles for us. This isn't really the way that they behave. And I think part of the 60s movement was an attempt to bring into balance everything that people were seeing and were observing, where they wanted to behave in public the way that people really felt and believed in private. It was very idealistic, but I think that what we have now is a shift in that direction, where many of us behave in public in ways that we used to think of as being only appropriate in private settings.
But what's interesting, though, is that it seems, though, now that the young people have come back, as with a trend toward conservatism, and do you find that within the families now that there is a stronger position of authority for the parents? I mean, we had the 60s and the 70s, but I find that in music, we've gone back to the tastes of the 50s and 60s. People want to dance. They want simplicity in music. They want lyrics that they can understand.
Right.
I mean, we've made the turn now. How has television brought us back to that point
Well, I
again?
think what's happened is that you only need a revolution when people are behaving in the old ways. Once people start to change the way they behave, once your president shows you his operation scars, once presidents no longer pretend that they always know everything.
So once you've had the coup.
Yeah, once you've had the coup, then you go back to a stability. And now I think adults do not demand the type of obedience that they used to demand of children. In universities, where all these revolts started, universities used to believe that they had the authority of parents and loco parenti, that they could control where students lived, what they wore, and how late they were out. Now that you have no curfews,
co-ed dorms.
Yes, co-ed dorms, and you can wear anything you want, then why would you be revolting?
Well, do you think that the universities and parents are comfortable now? Or at least more comfortable, sort of at peace with themselves and their family roles?
I think that there's been a shift, and there's much more comfort with it now. If you look at some of the documentary footage from the early 60s, where there was this sense that the world was falling apart, and that
Kent State, etc.
Yeah, that you had to dress in a certain way, and people had to follow your orders. And now I think people have adjusted to a whole new way of behaving, not only among children and adults, but also men and women and authorities and average citizens. We've made many adjustments, and I think as a result of those adjustments in age-related roles, in gender roles, and in authority roles, that we're now shifting to we've shifted to a whole new society, and that's why we see a lot more stability.
Well, in the 70s, you know, the me generation, I do sense that in the 80s we do have much more of a sense of caring for other people now than we did in the 70s.
I think that we're seeing this, and I think that part of what happened, I think, is that the 60s suddenly opened the door for us, lifted many of the veils, and on television, and we saw things that we didn't know were happening. We thought of war up until that time as glory and victory and fighting for democracy, and then on
My Lai Massacre.
Yeah, and in Vietnam, saving a village often meant burning it and burn babies, and we weren't accustomed to that. But then I think that we got worn out. There were so many things to worry about, and so many other people to care about, and so many disasters and concerns that people started focusing much more inward. We started thinking, well, there's so much to care about, and I would just be wasted.
Too heavy.
Yeah, that I might as well just care about myself and take care of that. And now I think that what we're seeing is a shift towards certain major issues where people are picking and focusing on one issue at a time. The famine relief in Ethiopia, or Farm Aid, or one focus, and and people are balancing now their own interests in themselves with this larger concern.
Well, I think that once we had come to the point of feeling more comfortable with ourselves as individuals, it's only then can we really care about other people.
Yes,
So
I think you're right.
I think that becomes like a natural flow. Let's get into the male-female relationships.
Okay.
I believe I was reading in your material, gender blending. Did you coin that expression?
Yes, I think so. Maybe I didn't. I don't know. I used
Let's
it.
talk about it.
I think that we're seeing the same types of things that we're seeing in adult-child roles. And that is that we used to think of, or men used to say that women were somewhat childlike and innocent, and they needed to be protected from many things.
Safe within their four walls.
Right, you know, women's place is in the home.
Till television.
Until television, and television brought the world home to women. And again, many feminists think television is just the enemy. It's terrible because of all the sexist images that are on TV. And again, I think they're focusing on the wrong thing. Just as I didn't imitate the innocent children when I watched Father Knows Best, I think that women do not imitate the stupid, mindless sex pots who are on television. I think instead that television has exposed women to all those parts of the culture that were once exclusively male domains. There's nothing more frustrating than being shown on TV adventures and roles and activities that you're told are reserved for somebody else. You're not allowed to do these things. And I think that television has broken down the old separation we used to think existed between the public male realm and the private female sphere.
You know, I really see that when I watch reruns of the Groucho Marx show. I am just amazed at the lack of awareness, I would say, of the general populace, but maybe even more so of women, of what's going on out there, like the commandos, let's say the raid at Entebbe.
Right.
I mean, if that had occurred, let's say in the 50s, I mean, maybe this is a sexist comment, but it seems to me that that was more the realm of the man to be concerned about world affairs, and that the woman might not even know that it had happened, other than just reading the headline.
Right, we used to think that there were these two worlds, the public male realm of rational accomplishments and brutal competitions, and the private female sphere of home, intuition, emotion, the moral dimension of the woman. That's the way we used to think of the male and female spheres. Even the extension of the vote to women was, the argument was that women would be able to extend this greater moral feeling to some of the outside problems of the world.
To bring femininity to the outside world.
To the outside world. But it was still based on the idea of these separate spheres. But television has no respect whatsoever for these differences of the spheres. And the difference between emotion and emotionless men, you don't see that on TV. For example, in Closeups, all public figures and events become emotional dramas. You see the president sweating or licking his lips or crying a little bit or with tears welling up in his eyes. And at the same time, all public events now have become dramas that are played out in the privacy of our living rooms and kitchens. So television exposes women to all those male realms, and it also, I think, makes men much more aware of the emotional dimensions of culture and the emotional consequences of their public actions. It's funny, for example, that television is one of the few public arenas in our culture where men routinely wear makeup.
True.
And are judged on their manner and appearance as much as on their accomplishments. And so the ways in which men and women used to evaluate each other, men used to make fun of women, for example, for voting for candidates because they looked pretty or they liked them and not understanding the issues. Well, the funny thing today is that surveys show everybody does this.
We all do that.
We all do this.
Well, let me ask you back to specific programming. What about the series, the wonderful series I Love Lucy?
Yeah.
Where does that fit into this?
Well, again, I think here you see this show which has very segregated roles. The men are involved in one realm and the women are silly in the home realm and don't always know what they're doing. They misunderstand things. They get a job and they don't understand the work world and so forth. But I think that this show and many other shows did something very different from the etiquette books that used to be written for men and women. And that is that men and women used to get their sex role instructions and their role models privately. Men would learn how to behave in front of women, but they were told this among men, and women were told this among women, and then they'd go out on stage and they'd meet each other and they'd play out the roles beautifully, always thinking, well, I may not really be a real man, you know, but I'm trying to do the best I can. And the woman may say, well, I'm not really a real woman, but I'm doing the best I can, but he is certainly a real man, and the man thinking, well, she's certainly a woman. And they were not aware of the backstage area where women often doubted their roles or wanted more, where men often said, well, why can't I cry, or, you know, how do I hold back the tears, and where they weren't aware of the strategies that were being used on them by the other sex. Television tends to show both sexes the backstage areas of the other sex. It shows them how women, shows men, for example, how women behave when no men are around, and how they talk about controlling men or trying to get them interested in them. And women see the same thing about men, how men may be very silly and have lots of fears and doubts when they're behind the scenes, and then they come out and they macho and brag about all their accomplishments. Well, when you see these things publicly, when you not only know them, but you know that the other person knows you know them, and when men and women sit and watch TV and learn these things together, it suddenly becomes possible to talk about the roles. To say, hey, why can't I as a woman act in this way? And a man to say, well, why do I always have to be so strong and emotionless? And I think as soon as you start discussing these roles, they collapse. They don't work anymore. People start taking parts of the other person's role. They start doubting. They start negotiating over everything that once was assumed. And I think that's what's happened in our culture.
Well, do you think that, would you say that I Love Lucy, could you say, put a label on it as to whether it was good or bad?
Well, it depends whether you think all these changes are good or bad. I think, I personally believe that the merging of masculinity and femininity is a good thing, that it gives us each ways of exploring other parts of our personality. I cry at movies now all the time, and I'm not that embarrassed about it anymore.
Well, do you think that when people would see, when the women would see I Love Lucy, do you think that that sort of welled up in them, you know, some sort of a rebellion to that image and helped bring about the feminist movement?
I think that the images of women in general on television, I don't think we can isolate single shows. I think we use them as examples. But I think in general, there was this strange clash of images. You had Lucy on I Love Lucy being not knowing anything about the world, and then you see on television news, you as a woman see all these things on television news that you're told you're not supposed to know about, not supposed to care about. And you know, don't worry your silly little head over these things. You know, you don't understand these things. And then I think you see suddenly women not accepting this split image anymore. They want to respond to these things they see on TV. They want to be involved in the activities that they're told are reserved for men. And I think that you have the rebellion based on that split image.
Well, what's interesting is that Lucille Ball, I mean, in contrast to the role that she played, I mean,
so strong,
strong and such a remarkable woman and a talent and businesswoman. And let's get into the political arena.
Okay.
You were talking about when we see the candidates on television, we see them sweating, we see them scratch their noses. How does that affect us?
Well, if you think about leadership and the image of authority, to have awe in somebody requires some distance.
Well, we want heroes. We want heroes.
Yeah. We want heroes. We always want heroes because we need people to look up to. And yet it's becoming harder and harder to find heroes because heroism and great leadership depend on distance and mystery. There's the old saying that no man is a hero to his valet. And the point is that when you see people backstage getting dressed, getting undressed, relaxing from their roles, rehearsing for their roles, they just don't seem to be that great, that wonderful. And what television has done is that it's reduced the amount of backstage area that all of our leaders and our authorities have to prepare for their roles. For example, when you think about the great orators, the people who have these wonderful, magnificent speeches, people complain today, how is it that our rhetoric is so lousy?
Bland,
Yeah, bland. You know, you have these, we have our president starting a sentence before he knows what the end of the sentence is going to be. You know, what happened to the great speeches? I think it's very clear what happened to the great speeches, and that is that when actors lose their rehearsal space, their performance becomes much more extemporaneous. William Jennings Bryan, for example, when he practiced that famous speech, "You shall not crucify mankind on a cross of gold," you know, that he had practiced that speech 100 times all over the country, going to different parts of the country and practicing it, and he even used that last line in other speeches and other debates over and over again. He wrote in his memoirs how he liked that line, he had crafted it, he had worked on it a number of times, and now he laid it away, he said, for a special occasion. It's such a quaint notion, because today when any national figure goes anywhere, to Oshkosh, Wisconsin, or to Nebraska, they're speaking to a national audience.
They now have to say the same thing to everyone.
Right. Yes, when you're talking to farmers, you know that through the camera lens, you're no longer just speaking to
industrialized cities are going to be hearing it as well, so you can't take agriculture against industry.
Yeah, you can't say, I'm going to take care of you guys. You know, I'm going to take care of the farmers and screw the industrialists, because the industrialists, they are listening to you. And you can't hone a speech, you know, work on a phrase and use it over and over again, because by the time you use it the 5th time, people are going, oh my God, is he saying that again? You know, it becomes a cliche.
You know, it's interesting when you mentioned the actor and the valet. Jesus Christ, he was accepted very little in his own town of Nazareth. He had to go to another town to be the great orator, to be who he was. And it seems that we want these heroes. We really do want heroes, but yet we want to know everything about them. I mean, let's compare FDR, for example, and Reagan. And take the illness, for example. We heard him, FDR, on the radio.
Exactly.
And he was a great hero to us, and we almost like forgot that he had the polio.
Right.
And yet with President Reagan, I mean, we knew everything about his colon and everything else. How does that, do we still have any heroes left?
I don't think that we have the old kind of heroes anymore. I think that radio is, with FDR, radio is a wonderful shield, and but also a way of getting to people. Radio was a very unusual medium in that it allowed one person, the president in this case, to reach into people's homes so he could get to them, but they couldn't really see him. And we all had images of FDR in our minds as this great warrior. We didn't picture him sitting in front of the microphone in a wheelchair. And there were no tape recorders in FDR's lifetime, so that when he was very profane and private, we never had any recordings of that.
Were the media not allowed to report that at all?
Yes, they weren't allowed. The president, because you couldn't capture him so easily on videotape and audio tape, he set the rules. If you wanted to talk to him, the rule was you cannot quote me without permission. And if you ask me a question and I don't want to answer it, you can't even say that I didn't answer it.
Let's take a political race, such as the close race between Nixon and Kennedy.
Yes.
Let's compare radio and television there.
Well, there's the wonderful example of the debate, same exact debate between Nixon and Kennedy, some people listening to them on radio and most people watching them on television. And the studies show that those who listened to them on radio clearly thought that Nixon had won.
Really?
That in terms of debating and the ideas, Nixon had it all over Kennedy. He was a very polished debater. But on television, Kennedy, rather than looking at Nixon and yelling at him as Nixon was doing to Kennedy, Kennedy looked at the camera and smiled. And the people liked that. He spoke to the people and he
got
joked.
me to make a commitment to my country.
Yes, and he made you feel that he was a nice guy. And people after the debate didn't think about the issues. You don't hear people on TV, or you don't hear people watching TV debates say that's a good argument, that's historically accurate. Instead, you hear them say things like he's nervous, he's doing well, she's nice, she's tough, look at those bags under his eyes, why did he pause for 5 seconds? People respond very emotionally and personally, and I think we're seeing that difference in politics today, where people vote for Ronald Reagan because they like him, even though they disagree with him on the issues. And Reagan does very well. He's very good on television because he has a very low-key style. He doesn't pretend to be the great authoritarian leader. And we admire that.
Just plain folks, just like we are. And thank you
Right.
so much for being on the show today. It's been very insightful, and I hope you'll come back again. And thank you for being with us today on Backstage Close-Up. I'm Theresa MacNeil, and I'll see you again next week. No Sense of Place is available at B. Dalton and other fine bookstores, or call 1-800-255-2665.